I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I have been so greatly privileged to bear.
Buckingham Palace has just confirmed a decision that could completely change the future of the next generation of the royal family. Princess Charlotte has been given an unprecedented role called Royal Guardian of the Crown, a position that elevates her from outside the line of succession to an official supporter of Prince George. But the tension within the palace isn't the title itself. The announcement shouldn't have been made. An influential figure within the royal family tried to delay the decision until after the next major ceremony. Prince William knew that the delay could pave the way for further interference, weakening Charlotte's position and turning a family decision into a public power struggle. William refused to wait. George remains the heir to the throne. Charlotte is not in a position to compete with her brother, but from the moment the sealed document was placed on the table, she was no longer outside the future plans of the crown. When the official words were read, Charlotte didn't smile. She sat close beside Catherine, her hand gripping the edge of the chair, while William silently watched his daughter, understanding that her childhood had just taken a completely different turn. Before we continue, please tell us where you're following this story from. And if you want to stay updated on the most sensational developments within the British royal family, subscribe to the Royal Palace Corridor and join us. Because the most shocking part isn't the title Charlotte just received. It's that someone within the family tried to prevent this announcement from coming out. And it was during that time that Charlotte began to understand that the words that had just been read were not merely congratulations. She didn't smile. Charlotte sat close to Catherine, her hands still gripping the edge of the chair, as if letting go would cause all the suppressed emotions to immediately pour out. On her face was pride, but it was also confusion and a worry that no one in the room could completely erase. William didn't take his eyes off his daughter. He watched her every blink, every breath, trying to guess whether Charlotte felt trusted or burdened by an overwhelming weight. Catherine also looked at her husband, searching in his eyes for reassurance that this decision wouldn't take too much from their daughter. The new role meant Charlotte would be prepared to support George in his future responsibilities. She would attend selected training sessions, learning about the Constitution diplomacy philanthropy and how to support the heir in times of crisis. William finally spoke. "This title isn't meant for you to stand behind George. It means you'll stand beside him." Charlotte looked at Catherine first, then back at her father. No one applauded. There was only a heavy silence, because that title could give Charlotte a clear purpose, but it could also take away her childhood, her privacy, her right to make mistakes, and her normal life. William believed he was protecting the future of both his children. But Catherine understood that from that moment on, Charlotte's childhood might never be the same again. But what reassured William most wasn't the approved plan, but the conversation he decided to have before the world knew about Charlotte's new title. He invited George and Charlotte into a private room where there were no advisors, no cameras, and no royal formalities. Just a father and his two children, preparing to embark on a completely new chapter in their lives. William looked at George first and gently explained that his position in the line of succession wouldn't change. George would still be the future heir to the throne. The new title wouldn't alter the order of succession, nor would it give Charlotte any right to compete. Instead, it would provide her with an official path to learn, prepare, and accompany her brother when the time was right. George listened intently. After a few seconds of silence, he looked at his sister and softly asked, "Does this mean I'll always have to follow you?" Charlotte didn't answer immediately. She bowed her head in thought, then looked up with a calmer gaze than ever before. "I don't want your crown. I just don't want you to face it alone." The room fell silent again. George bowed his head slightly, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Catherine turned away to hide the emotion clearly visible in her eyes. William suddenly realized that all documents, all plans, all titles paled in comparison to the genuine affection between the two children. George approached Charlotte and quietly extended his hand to his sister. Charlotte smiled faintly and took his hand. No further promises were needed. Both understood that the new roles weren't meant to elevate Charlotte above George, but to ensure that neither child would grow up alone. However, the conversation between William and his two children was merely the result of a decision made months earlier. To understand why he insisted on giving Charlotte an official role, one must return to a ceremony the family will never forget. 6 months earlier at St. George's Hall, the atmosphere inside the Commonwealth Youth Service was both solemn and full of anticipation. It was the first time Prince George was being prepared to deliver a formal speech before hundreds of guests, Commonwealth representatives, and members of the royal family. For weeks he had practiced every word, every movement, and every bow under William's guidance. The plan was for William to stand right beside his son throughout that important moment. Charlotte and Louis were seated near the stage with Catherine to watch George complete his first milestone on his journey as heir. But just minutes before the ceremony began, everything unexpectedly changed. King Charles was informed that he was showing signs of exhaustion and had to leave the ceremonial area. Almost simultaneously, William was urgently escorted out by his assistants for updates. The program could not be delayed. Whispers began to spread throughout the hall. Officials constantly checked their watches, while hundreds of guests waited in silent anticipation. Standing behind the doors leading to the stage, George suddenly realized his father would not be able to appear as planned. He stood motionless. His hands trembled slightly. His breathing became rapid. His eyes darted towards the aisle, hoping William would return, but the corridor remained empty. Catherine immediately stepped forward, but the officials hastily adjusting the program inadvertently held her back for a few brief but tense seconds. And in that moment, while the adults were still trying to figure out how to handle the situation, only Charlotte understood that George didn't need any more instructions or explanations. What he needed most at that moment was simply to know that he didn't have to step forward alone. And then amidst that tense atmosphere, something unexpected happened. While the courtiers were still conferring, the officials were still trying to adjust the program, and all eyes were on the stage. Charlotte didn't look at them. She only looked at George. She realized her brother was trying to hide his panic. His shoulders were stiff, his hands still trembled slightly, and his eyes were desperately searching for William. In just a few seconds, George's name would be called out before hundreds of guests. But the man who always stood by him during the most crucial moments wasn't there. Charlotte didn't wait for anyone's signal. Neither did she ask permission from any of the courtiers. With slow but decisive steps, she approached her brother. When she was only a short distance from George, Charlotte leaned in slightly and lowered her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "You just need to take the first step." It wasn't a long speech of encouragement, not a complicated piece of advice. It was just a short sentence, but enough to pull George back from the fear that was engulfing him. Charlotte walked beside him, not stepping ahead, not trying to do anything for him. She was just close enough for George to know that if he turned around, his sister was still there. It was that quiet presence that made all the difference. George took a deep breath, adjusted his posture, and walked onto the stage. His first speech went smoothly. When the final words rang out, the entire hall gave a long round of applause. The officials discreetly breathed a sigh of relief that the ceremony had passed its most dangerous moment without anyone outside noticing anything unusual. A few minutes later, William returned before the program ended. he watched George finish his speech with the pride of a father. But what captivated him was Charlotte, who stood quietly in the background, neither seeking attention nor accepting any praise. After the ceremony, William found Charlotte in a quiet corridor. He knelt down to his daughter's eye level and gently asked, "Why did you come forward?" Charlotte answered almost without thinking, "Because George looked like he was alone." William was silent for a long time. He slowly rose, but in that moment, something changed forever. He no longer saw Charlotte as just a little girl, silently observing everything. He saw in her a protective instinct, a calmness and loyalty that could not be taught by any training course. From that moment, William understood that Charlotte had a role meant for her. Only until then, the palace had never officially acknowledged it. And it was from that brief conversation after the ceremony that William began to see things in a completely different light. What troubled him was no longer how George had gotten through his first speech, but why Charlotte, despite not being given any official responsibilities, was the only one who knew what to do at this crucial moment. Just a few days later, William asked his assistants to bring him the succession support framework, an internal plan outlining how Prince George and his siblings would be prepared for the future of the royal family. He spent hours reading page after page, hoping to find an explanation for what he had just witnessed. But the more he read, the more William noticed a disturbing gap. George had a clear path. He was being trained in the Constitution's ceremonial rites, national responsibilities, and the necessary skills of a future monarch. Each stage of his development had been meticulously planned. Meanwhile, Charlotte had almost no official direction. The documents only mention her in situations requiring assistance or appearances at certain public events. There was no specific training program, no long-term development plan. This means Charlotte could be expected to shoulder responsibility when needed, but she is not adequately prepared to do so. Louis is in a similar situation. His future role remains uncertain, depending on decisions to be made years from now. William closed the file and fell silent, lost in thought. Images of previous generations flashed through his mind, where one child was given all the purpose and preparation, while the rest had to find their place in the shadow of the heir. He understood that this distance not only created loneliness, but could also lead to hurt misunderstanding and lasting rifts within the family. He did not want George and Charlotte to follow that path. Therefore, William rejected the old proposal, which completely separated the brothers' futures. According to that plan, George would continue his constitutional training and prepare for the throne, while Charlotte would only undertake some charitable activities and have limited public appearances. For William, that wasn't preparation for the future. It was merely prolonging a model that had revealed too many weaknesses. He took a pen, set aside the old plan, and began rewriting it from the beginning. But William didn't anticipate that as soon as the new plan was presented to the family, someone would stand up and warn that Charlotte was being given too much too soon. However, when William's new plan began circulating internally, the first reaction didn't come from the public, but from within the palace itself. A quick private meeting was arranged in a quiet drawing room, where there were no cameras, no press, and no advisors present. Just William, Camilla, and the documents lying on the wooden table bathed in the afternoon light. Camilla broke the silence first. She didn't object emotionally, but with carefully prepared arguments. She argued that Charlotte was still too young to bear such a weighty role. A new title could easily mislead the public, creating unnecessary comparisons between Charlotte and George. Camilla also worried that establishing an official position for Charlotte might inadvertently overshadow members of the royal family who had carried responsibilities for many years, such as Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie. Then she brought up the most sensitive issue, suggesting that public opinion might view the entire plan as Catherine's attempt to elevate her daughter's status. The room fell silent. William maintained a calm tone, but his expression changed the moment Catherine was mentioned. He asserted that Catherine had been the most cautious person throughout the planning process. She had never asked for more power for Charlotte. On the contrary, she worried that the title might rob her daughter of her childhood. William made it clear that no one should turn his wife's caution into political ambition. According to him, Charlotte wasn't chosen because she was Catherine's daughter, but because of what she had demonstrated through her actions. At the moment George needed her most. Camilla quietly pushed the documents toward William and revealed something that further intensified the tense atmosphere. She said that many advisors had been secretly conferring with King Charles. They suggested postponing the entire plan until George came of age, arguing that the royal family didn't need to change so soon. The opposition, according to Camilla, was no longer the opinion of a few individuals, but had begun to spread within the palace. She looked directly at William and said slowly, "This title will change the temperature in the family." William gently closed the file before replying, "The family has already changed. This plan simply acknowledges that." He explained that the plan wasn't written for the present, but for the monarchy George would inherit in the future. A more streamlined royal family would require clear preparation for each member. George couldn't continue to be placed in the position of an heir bearing all responsibility alone, and Charlotte shouldn't grow up without purpose or formal preparation. At this point, William picked up the document and revealed the final detail. King Charles had agreed to the core principles of the plan months earlier. Camilla didn't respond. She simply watched William leave the room carrying the plan, which still lacked his final signature. Camilla couldn't stop William during that private meeting. But both understood that the final decision hadn't been made yet. The signature that could make the plan a part of history rested in the hands of only one person, King Charles. However, after William left the room, the real debate began. It was no longer between two men with differing viewpoints, but within the mind of King Charles, who was faced with the choice between preserving tradition and paving the way for a completely new future. Alone in his study, Charles laid two plans before him. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating the pages he had read over and over again. The first represented the familiar model that had existed for generations. George remained central to all preparations, while Charlotte would only undertake general public duties without her own training or formal coordination with her brother. The second bore William's distinct mark. According to this plan, Charlotte would be trained alongside George in relevant fields, have a clearly defined role, and become the heir apparent's official companion. The two brothers would walk different paths, but both were prepared to serve the future of the royal family. Charles understood that if he approved the new plan, he wouldn't just be signing a document. He was acknowledging William's vision for the future monarchy, even while his own reign was still ongoing. But if he refused, he risked losing his son's trust and letting George grow up with the loneliness many previous heirs had experienced. Charlotte also risked repeating the path of the younger sons, always searching for her own purpose in the shadow of the one who would wear the crown. Just then the door creaked open. William entered. No more heated arguments. He calmly looked at his father and said, "Avoiding the past doesn't mean we're protecting the next generation." That short statement left Charles speechless. He suddenly realized William was no longer standing before him as a son seeking approval. In his eyes and in his voice, now was the composure of someone ready to shoulder the future of the entire institution. What troubled Charles most wasn't the plan itself, but the meaning behind his signature. If he agreed, Many might see it as an admission that the family had made mistakes, that the gap between William and Harry hadn't been closed in time, and that the old model had left wounds no one wanted to repeat. Charles remained silent, gazing at the two plans before him. Then, in that silence, he suddenly remembered a conversation from many years ago with the only person who understood the weight of both the throne and the family better than anyone else, Queen Elizabeth II. And at that very moment, an old memory unexpectedly surfaced in Charles's mind. He gently closed his eyes, recalling a conversation from many years ago with Queen Elizabeth II, who had spent almost her entire life balancing the responsibilities of a monarch and the affections of a mother. Charles slowly recounted that his mother had once said that princesses of future generations should not be considered secondary simply because tradition had never given them a higher position. According to her, a system is only truly sustainable when it recognizes the abilities of each member rather than allowing old stereotypes to dictate their future. Charles silently looked back at the plan before him. After a few minutes of thought, he looked up and told William that he would approve it, but with one unchangeable condition. Charlotte's education had to be protected. Her childhood preserved her right to live as a child, uncompromised, and this title should only prepare her for future responsibilities, never become a cage to imprison her life.
William almost immediately agreed.
There was no further debate. Charles took the pen and signed the last page of the plan. After William left the room with the documents, Charles remained alone. He slowly removed his glasses, placed his hand on the signed page, and softly called out a name, Elizabeth. In that brief moment, a single signature seemed to connect 3 generations of the royal family. Elizabeth was the one leaving the message, Charles was the one making the decision, and William was the one preparing for the future. That signature closed the chapter on power struggles. But just a few hours later, Charlotte began to feel the very real price that the adult title she had just chosen for herself would come with. However, as soon as Charles's signature closed the debate in the palace, a completely different story began. It is no longer about documents, meetings, or strategic decisions, but about a little girl who has just realized that her life has changed in just one afternoon. In the following days, Charlotte's schedule was almost completely rewritten. A long-term training plan was quickly prepared, including constitutional history, diplomacy, charity activities, royal ceremonies, how to support heirs, and respond to emergency situations. At the same time, the security team was also strengthened. Future events were arranged so that she would always appear closer to George, and all daily activities began to be managed more strictly than before. What made Charlotte saddest was not in those planning pages. She knows that even a small event at school will be accompanied by additional security guards. Normal classes, meetings with friends, or private moments will no longer happen like before. Charlotte quietly closed the door. A few minutes later, Catherine gently called her daughter's name. The door opened. She found Charlotte sitting on the floor next to the card announcing her new title. The girl looked up and asked softly, "Does this title mean everything normal will disappear?" Catherine did not answer immediately. She sat down next to her child, held that small hand, and gently said, "Duty must match who you are. It must not erase that person." Those words brought comfort, but also made Catherine understand more clearly than ever the price Charlotte was paying. And when William learned that this conversation had taken place, he suddenly realized that he may have opened up a path for his daughter's future, but at the same time, he also unintentionally made Charlotte begin to feel trapped by the very title he wanted to use to protect her. However, what made William think the most was not only Charlotte's reaction, but also the question of how to protect his daughter from the very expectations he had just placed on her shoulders. Therefore, he asked the security team to review the entire plan and cut down on unnecessary changes with the hope that Charlotte could still retain as much of a normal childhood as possible. Not long after, Princess Anne took the initiative to meet William privately. She expressed support for the plan, but her advice was extremely blunt. Charlotte must learn to refuse attention. She must know how to set limits. Not every invitation is an obligation, and not every sacrifice is synonymous with service. Without boundaries, devotion can easily become an invisible cage. William was speechless at those words. He canceled the next meeting, left the entire file on the table, and decided that what Charlotte needed right now was not another plan, but a conversation with her father. That night, William did not bring any succession documents with him. He just smiled and asked his daughter a very simple question. "Do you want to walk with Dad for a while?" And so, the two walked silently across the quiet courtyard, without assistance, without courtiers, and without any documents or speeches. William admitted that perhaps he had made too big a decision, but it wasn't an order, and Charlotte would never have to bear all the responsibility for George. He promised that her future wouldn't belong to any institution. Charlotte softly asked, "Does George know that he can still ask me for help?" William smiled and nodded. He explained that this role only acknowledged what she had always done wholeheartedly. Charlotte replied softly, "I'm not afraid to help him. I'm only afraid that people will forget that first and foremost, I am George's sister." William agreed to add a family clause to the plan and embraced his daughter. Charlotte had accepted the role on her own terms. But when the official announcement was made, the simple promise between father and son quickly transcended the palace gates and became a symbol discussed throughout the nation. Soon after, the official announcement quickly spread throughout England. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd began to gather as reporters repeatedly mentioned Charlotte's new title. In the midst of the crowd, a little girl carried on her father's shoulders held up a sign that read, "A sister can be strong too." Applause erupted, and the image quickly appeared on evening news broadcasts. Public opinion immediately split into two camps. One side praised William for modernizing the royal family, believing that George would no longer have to shoulder the future alone, and that Charlotte finally had a clear purpose. But many others worried she was too young to carry such high expectations. That afternoon, Catherine quietly watched the news with Charlotte. When a commentator called the little girl a political tool, Catherine immediately turned off the screen and softly said, "The public can interpret my role, but they don't have the right to decide who I am." However, amidst the endless media debates, a simple moment inadvertently calmed everything. The next morning, a major newspaper featured a front-page photo of George and Charlotte side by side under the headline, "The Heir and His Guardian." George gazed at the photo and chuckled softly. "See, they put you behind me again." Charlotte bent down to examine the picture carefully before shaking her head and smiling. "But in real life, we're walking side by side. The press doesn't decide where I stand." George smiled along with his sister. It was the first time Charlotte had truly smiled since hearing about her new title, as if in that brief moment she had stopped thinking about the responsibilities ahead and simply returned to being George's sister. But the press's reaction wasn't the final verdict. The real verdict awaited them in a place without cameras, without sensational headlines, and without commentary. It's set within a family meal where those bearing royal titles simply want to see each other as parents, children, and siblings. Finally, as the arguments subsided, the family gathered for a simple dinner. There were no advisors, no ceremonies, and no formal speeches. Just King Charles, William, Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Charles slowly stated that titles only truly mattered when they reflected genuine service. If Charlotte's new role damaged the trust between the two brothers, then all previous decisions were meaningless. At that moment, George took out a small family heirloom and gave it to Charlotte. "You were my sister before you were called patron. No title can change that." Charlotte smiled, placing the heirloom beside the title card side by side, and softly replied, "Nothing written in the palace can change my promise that I will always stand by you." George pulled a chair closer to his sister. Catherine quietly held William's hand under the table, while Charles bowed slightly, his eyes filled with contentment. Perhaps the new title didn't change who would wear the crown. It only changed how that crown would be born. George remained the heir. Charlotte wasn't his rival, but rather a sister prepared to accompany him while remaining true to herself. Do you think William was right to give Charlotte an official role alongside George, or was she still too young to bear such a great responsibility? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about the British royal family, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos.